The main architectural work we do is doors and staircases, I would say. And we were approached last year by a client who bought an old rectory and basically gutted the whole thing, and they wanted to put 4 sets of stairs up that had some airy feel to it, and they proposed using a perforated material for that, and we set out to figure out how to do that. This staircase is a 1/4-inch perforated material made by McNichols. It's a 1/4-inch hole on 3/8-inch centers, and we purchased it with the intent of bending ribbons, like you see here, and then seaming them in a very accurate way to create a fluid effect. There were some issues. So one thing about the material itself is that the perforations, because they're punched and not, let's say, water jet cut or laser cut, are larger on the bottom than they are on the top. Also, during the perforation, the material seems to get work hardened. And so what we discovered is that when we got the material to do some sample bends, even though we're using a very large radius punch and die on our set, we were getting cracking almost exclusively on the back side of the material, where there is less material because of the punch hole being bigger on that side. Which led us down the road of figuring out how we could make the material without bending it, without breaking it. So we sent all of the McNichols material to an annealer. Before it could be annealed, they wanted it to be sandblasted. So when it came back from the annealer, the material was very unflat, which was a problem during bending. But once the material was bent, that flatness was no longer an issue. The other problem we had with the factory material is that when we bent it, the location of the bend shifted because the material wants to bend in between these 2 holes somewhere. And we found that the material would slip as it was going in and thus would not bend where we wanted it to, which was a big problem for this. Luckily, when we got the annealed material back, that seemed not to be an issue anymore. But even so, the way we did this was not to visually indicate off of a line where the bend location was, but was actually to use the holes themselves in the material to index the bend. On the break, we had a little gauge that would slip into one of these holes and then push up against the die, so we knew exactly where the bend would repeat at each time. So for layout for these, we would cut them on the water jet, and then we would count holes to index between index to where the bends would be. Because we wanted the ends of the material to line up so we could make a continuous ribbon and thus get the holes to line up as good as possible, as close as possible, we wanted to make sure that the hole was at the right spacing when it got to that point. So because we were indexing off the holes of each one, we knew approximately where the holes would be. Now the big problem of the annealing on flatness for us was that the sheet itself warped, and when we got to some of these junctions, they weren't actually perfectly in line with the pattern, especially the ones that happened sort of in the middle of the sheet. The client wanted to maintain some of the factory edges on this, so we were constrained to where we could place the blank within the sheet. The areas that did have uneven patterns at the seam, this is not one of them. This actually looks really great. We filled holes and we re-drilled holes at those locations to make them look good. In the end, the entire assembly will be electrostatically painted on site, and one set is in so far with 3 more to go.